I always thought betrayal would be loud. Shattered glass, screaming arguments, or the kind of chaos that makes neighbors call the police. But in my life, the biggest betrayal came quietly, hidden beneath a layer of trust, loyalty, and love I thought was unbreakable. It began with something so small, something I almost ignored. A slip of paper tucked beneath the seat of our family car, just a torn receipt from a corner store. The purchase didn't belong to me, and the timestamp didn't match when I'd last used the car. At first, I brushed it off. Who doesn't drop a stray receipt now and then? But a voice deep inside whispered that this tiny clue was about to change my entire life. My wife Vanessa and I had been married for nearly a decade. We had built what looked like the perfect family. 2 kids, a home we worked hard for, and a life that seemed stable from the outside. But what the world didn't see was the undercurrent of quiet struggles, the invisible weight of being a black man constantly judged, overlooked, and underestimated at work and in society. Still, I thought home was my sanctuary, the one place where my skin color didn't make me a target. I was wrong. That receipt led me down a path I never wanted to walk. It uncovered not only Vanessa's affair, but something far darker. The child she carried wasn't mine, and the man she had betrayed me with wasn't just anyone. He was my boss. The same man who shook my hand in meetings, smiled at my ideas, and then quietly stole them. The same man who joked about diversity hires when he thought I couldn't hear. The same man who had the power to decide whether I could keep providing for my family. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. My wife, the woman I trusted most, had not only betrayed our vows, but had chosen to side with the very system that had worked so hard to keep me down. From that moment, I knew my life was no longer about protecting the illusion of family. It was about survival. It was about reclaiming my dignity in a world that already tried to strip it away. And it was about revenge, not just against the woman who lied to me every day, but against the man who thought he could take everything from me and walk away smiling. Because what started with a torn receipt would end with an explosion neither of them ever saw coming. Before we start, make sure to subscribe to True Heart Tales, where we bring you powerful stories of betrayal, resilience, and the fight for justice. Your support helps us share voices and experiences the world often tries to silence. My name is Gary, and for most of my life I believed hard work and loyalty would shield me from life's worst cruelties. I grew up in a world that taught me early how skin color could shape your destiny. I remember being followed around in stores, judged by teachers who expected less of me, and hearing the quiet but sharp comments whispered behind my back. But through it all, I held on to hope. I thought if I studied harder, worked longer, and loved fiercely, I could create a life where racism didn't dictate my worth. By the time I turned 35, I thought I had done it. I had a respectable job as an engineer at a firm that was finally starting to notice me. I owned a house in a good neighborhood, and I had a wife, Vanessa, who I believed loved me enough to weather any storm. Together we had 2 children, James and Sonia, who I thought carried my bloodline, my legacy, and my dreams. Home was supposed to be my refuge. After long days at work, where I sometimes felt like a token hire instead of a valued partner, I came back to laughter, bedtime stories, and Vanessa's smile. She came from a different world, a world where her skin granted her the privilege of never being questioned in a store, never being pulled over for looking suspicious, never having to explain her presence in the office building she worked in. She didn't fully understand my battles, but I believed her love made up for it. That belief was the foundation I built my life upon. And like any foundation, it seemed solid until the cracks began to show. It started subtly. Vanessa began to guard her phone more closely. She stayed late at work more often, always with an excuse that sounded reasonable. The intimacy between us grew mechanical, as though she were simply fulfilling an obligation rather than sharing love. But I convinced myself these changes were normal, just the growing pains of a marriage stretched thin by children, careers, and exhaustion. Then came the small details I couldn't ignore. That torn receipt in the car with purchases I never made, a faint smell of cologne that wasn't mine lingering on her clothes, a look in her eyes that wasn't the warmth of a wife but the guilt of someone carrying a secret. Even then, I doubted myself. People like me are taught to be cautious, taught that raising suspicion without proof only makes us look paranoid, aggressive, or unstable. At work, I already had to defend my competence daily, making sure every report was flawless, every presentation airtight, because one slip could be used against me. At home, I didn't want to be the husband who jumped to conclusions, who accused without evidence. But my gut told me something was wrong. I began to notice the patterns. Nights when Vanessa stayed late always coincided with days when her boss, Bill, mysteriously left work early. Bill, the man who once patted me on the back and told me, "You're one of the good ones." Bill, who laughed at jokes about diversity quotas in the break room, thinking I wasn't listening. Bill, who held my career in his hands while subtly reminding me I'd always have to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. The thought that he might also have his hands on my wife felt unthinkable, unbearable. But evidence was stacking up, and the doubts that gnawed at me became impossible to silence. Vanessa and I still played the part of a happy family. We hosted dinners, took the kids to the park, smiled for pictures on birthdays. But beneath the smiles, a storm was brewing. Each laugh sounded hollow. Each touch felt colder. And each time she said, "I love you," I wondered if those words were meant for me or for the man who sat across from me in the office, pretending to be my mentor. I didn't know it yet, but the betrayal I feared was far deeper than an affair. It was a betrayal of trust, of loyalty, and of identity. It wasn't just about a marriage crumbling. It was about a system that had followed me into the most sacred place of my life, my home. The cracks were spreading, and soon everything I thought I had built on love and trust would collapse, leaving me with nothing but anger, heartbreak, and the hunger for revenge. The human mind can ignore whispers, but it cannot silence a storm. And by now, the storm inside me was impossible to ignore. Vanessa's excuses multiplied, but her details never quite aligned. A late meeting would end with her coming home hours later than any meeting reasonably could. Her phone, once left casually on the counter, was now glued to her hand, locked and face down. She would shower immediately upon arriving home, as though she needed to wash away traces of a life I wasn't allowed to see. At work, the whispers grew louder too. I began to notice small smirks, sideways glances from colleagues who seemed to know something I didn't. And then there was Bill. His eyes lingered too long when he mentioned Vanessa in passing. "How's your lovely wife?" he'd ask, with a smile that didn't belong in professional conversation. Every word dripped with something smug, something unspoken. The final straw came one evening when Vanessa claimed she was visiting her sister. Out of instinct, I checked the GPS history on our shared family car. Her destination wasn't her sister's house. It was a hotel off the highway. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, but my hands shook with a strange calmness, the kind of calm you feel right before your entire world shatters. I drove there. I parked far enough away not to be seen, but close enough to watch. And then I saw it. My wife, stepping out of the car, her hand brushing against Bill's arm as if the intimacy was natural, comfortable, rehearsed. They laughed together, disappearing into the hotel lobby, leaving me to sit in the darkness of my car with a rage so consuming I could barely breathe. That night, I didn't confront her. I went home. I sat in my living room, staring at family photos hanging on the wall. Vanessa smiling in her wedding dress, my arm wrapped around her waist. Our children as toddlers, their innocent grins frozen in time. Were those smiles lies? Were they mine to claim? Or had even that been stolen from me? The weeks that followed only deepened the cut. Vanessa announced she was pregnant. Instead of joy, I felt dread coil inside me. I knew the truth before she even spoke it. The timing didn't align. The distance between us had grown too wide, and when I looked into her eyes, I saw guilt where there should have been happiness. I kept silent, but silence was agony. I began to study the patterns more closely, her appointments, her calls, the sudden bursts of secrecy that surrounded this pregnancy. Meanwhile, at work, Bill grew bolder. He dismissed my ideas in meetings, mocked my suggestions under his breath, and made sure I knew who held the power. To him, I wasn't just an employee. I was the fool whose wife carried his child. And then came the cruelest twist. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Vanessa confessed, not out of guilt, not to unburden herself, but to manipulate. She told me the child was Bill's, but she insisted we could raise it as our own, as if my love and loyalty could simply be stretched to cover betrayal that deep. She spoke of stability, of protecting our children, of keeping the family intact. But I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't about family. It was about her comfort, her fear of losing the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. I realized then that I wasn't just betrayed. I was being used. I was expected to shoulder the humiliation, to raise another man's child, while the very man who mocked my existence at work smirked in private triumph. The racism I endured in the office had always been suffocating, but now it had crept into my home, staining the very core of my life. Bill hadn't just taken my ideas, my opportunities, my dignity at work. He had taken my family, my legacy, and the sanctity of my marriage. And Vanessa had allowed it, had chosen it, had hidden behind lies until the truth could no longer be buried. But betrayal has a strange way of forging clarity. And in that clarity I understood one thing. I could not remain silent any longer. If the world wanted me to bow my head, to accept the weight of racism and betrayal without resistance, then it had underestimated me. I began to plan, quietly, carefully, with patience sharpened by years of enduring what others thought I couldn't survive. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't just about evening the score. It was about reclaiming my dignity in a world determined to strip it away. And soon, Vanessa and Bill would discover what it truly meant to break a man who had nothing left to lose. The day of reckoning didn't arrive with shouting. It came with silence. The kind of silence that masks thunder. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, hotel receipts, credit card charges, screenshots of messages I'd retrieved from cloud backups Vanessa thought she had erased. Every detail, every lie, every secret rendezvous had been cataloged with surgical precision. I knew the truth wasn't enough. The truth needed witnesses. It needed impact. And so I chose the stage carefully. It was a Saturday evening, the kind when families gather for dinner. Vanessa had invited her parents, her sister, and even a few close friends. She thought it was an ordinary family meal, but for me it was the perfect stage to shatter the illusions she had built. I set the table. I smiled. I laughed when the children ran around the living room. But inside, my heartbeat drummed like war drums. When everyone finally sat down, I stood at the head of the table. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from the anticipation of release. "Before we begin," I said, my voice steady, "I think there's something you all deserve to know." The room quieted. Forks froze midair. Vanessa's eyes darted to me, already sensing danger. I placed a folder on the table. Inside were the printed receipts, the messages, the undeniable evidence of her betrayal. I pulled out one photo, Vanessa entering the hotel with Bill, and laid it down where everyone could see. Gasps echoed around the room. Her sister's hand flew to her mouth. Her mother's face turned pale. Vanessa stammered, reaching for excuses, but her voice collapsed under the weight of proof. And then I delivered the blow she couldn't escape. "This child she carries, I said, staring directly into her tear-streaked face. "Isn't mine. It's his." I threw another photo down, a candid shot of Bill and Vanessa, her hand resting on her belly, both of them smiling like the world belonged to them. The silence was deafening. Her father pushed back his chair, disgust etched into his face. Her mother wept openly. The room that once held warmth was now a furnace of shame, and Vanessa sat at the center, drowning in it. But the climax wasn't complete yet, because this betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. The next Monday, I walked into the office with a calmness that unsettled even me. I carried the same folder, but this time with additional documents, a carefully constructed report that exposed Bill's misconduct. Not only the affair, but also the racial bias and exploitation he had built his career upon. I had compiled testimonies, financial irregularities, and evidence of him stealing credit for others' work, much of it mine. When I entered the boardroom where executives gathered for the weekly review, I didn't sit in my usual corner. I stood at the head of the table, just as I had at dinner. "There's something the company deserves to know," I began. I laid out everything: the personal betrayal, the professional misconduct, the way Bill mocked diversity, the way he dismissed me while secretly dismantling my marriage. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. His smug smile evaporated, replaced by the pale, ashen face of a man watching his empire collapse. The board erupted in murmurs. Some were shocked, others furious. By the time I was done, Bill wasn't just a cheater. He was a liability, a man who had jeopardized the company with scandal, racism, and corruption. He was escorted out that very day. His career ended in disgrace, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. And Vanessa? The fallout was swift. Her family turned against her, unable to forgive the humiliation she had inflicted. Friends who once envied her marriage now whispered about her betrayal. She lost not only me, but the image of stability she had clung to. I filed for divorce, ensuring every detail of her infidelity was on record. The custody battle was brutal, but the court saw what mattered. I had been the faithful parent, the stable provider, the one who placed his children above his pride. I won custody, and with it, I reclaimed the only family that truly mattered: my children. The climax wasn't just the destruction of two people who betrayed me. It was the moment I stood up to a system that had tried to break me, both at home and at work. For years I had endured whispers, jokes, and dismissals. But in that moment I made them all listen. I made them see. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the man silently enduring. I was the man who had turned betrayal into fire and used it to burn down everything built against me. In the weeks after the dust settled, my life felt like standing in the ruins of a home after a fire. The structure was gone, the air heavy with smoke, and yet, beneath the ashes, the foundations still remained. My children, James and Sonia, became that foundation. They were my reason to rise from the wreckage. The divorce was finalized with a brutal efficiency. Vanessa tried to appeal for leniency, painting herself as a woman who had made a mistake in the fog of loneliness. But the truth was undeniable, and so were the consequences. The court saw through her pleas, granting me primary custody. She was left with visitation rights, her once perfect image shattered beyond repair. Bill's downfall spread like wildfire. Colleagues who once laughed at his racist jokes now distanced themselves, eager to protect their own careers. His name, once spoken with respect in professional circles, became a stain, synonymous with arrogance, betrayal, and disgrace. I didn't just reclaim my dignity, I exposed a rot that had infected my workplace for years. But victory didn't come without scars. Nights were still hard. I would lie awake replaying moments in my mind, the look on Vanessa's face when I exposed her, the smirk on Bill's lips the first time he dismissed me at work, the whispers I endured that made me question my worth. Healing wasn't instant. Betrayal leaves a wound that time doesn't erase. It only teaches you how to live with the scar. And yet, amidst the pain, something stronger began to grow. A sense of freedom. For the first time, I was no longer living in the shadow of someone else's control. My home was peaceful again, filled with the laughter of children untainted by secrets. I learned to cook new meals for them, to braid Sonia's hair on school mornings, to sit with James as he practiced math problems. They didn't care about my scars. To them, I was just Dad, steady, present, and theirs. Work changed too. With Bill gone, new leadership stepped in, leadership that valued fairness over favoritism. I began to rise, not because I begged for recognition, but because I had proven myself time and time again. My ideas were no longer dismissed. My presence was no longer a token. I was no longer overlooked. But the true resolution wasn't in promotions or court victories. It was in the quiet moments. The mornings I woke up without a knot in my chest. The evenings I tucked my children into bed knowing our home was no longer a battlefield of lies. The moments I looked in the mirror and saw not a victim, not a broken man, but a survivor who had faced the fire and walked through it. Still, the lessons remained sharp. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people you love most. Racism doesn't always wear a hood or shout from the streets. Sometimes it hides in the boardroom, in the handshake of a boss, in the smirk of someone who believes you'll never fight back. I learned that silence can protect you, but it can also destroy you. For years, I kept quiet to avoid being labeled, to avoid the backlash that always seems heavier for people who look like me. But in the end, it was my voice, steady, undeniable, and unflinching, that brought justice. And so, I stand here, not as a man defined by betrayal, but as a man defined by what he did after. I rebuilt. I fought back. I refused to let the world dictate my worth. The scars remain, yes, but so does the strength. And maybe that's the final lesson in all of this. Life will betray you. People will underestimate you. Systems will try to silence you. But when you decide to rise, when you decide to fight, there is no betrayal powerful enough to keep you down. So I ask you, if you were in my place, betrayed not just by a partner but by a system designed to break you, would you choose silence? Or would you choose to rise, to fight, and to reclaim your dignity no matter the cost? Because in the end, it's not betrayal that defines us. It's what we do after.